You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible Study for the 21st century. Welcome, friends. Jim Cantelon here. It's such a joy to come your way, and it's been several years now. All we do is go through the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. And I include Acts because it's part 2 of Luke. So to me, it's the history of the beginning of the early church for sure, but it's also, I think, a part of the story of Jesus. Anyhow, we take our time, as you know, if you watch the program. We take months sometimes to go through just a few chapters. Right now, we're in the Sermon on the Mount. It's terrific. I'll be back with it right after this. I'm here with Teresa Malila at the Home of Mercy, which is an entire compound now that is a real miraculous transformation from what it used to be. And we're in front of a brand new building, Teresa, that has just recently been built.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about this.
This building is the main hall, and during the cold season, we had nowhere to meet. So this is now the hall that we meet in during the cold season, but also it's a dining room. It has a kitchen, and this is the serving area you see here. It opens up. So we've had training here, quite a bit of training for counselors, for the students in the Berean, the Bible study groups, but also people who come in home-based care. We did the training here for home-based care too. So people come in here and they can learn in here, but they can also sleep in here. Because it's a sleeping facility. At night, they can use the facility to sleep. It's got a kitchen, it's got a stores, and this is a serving area. But it's very airy, as you can see. It's got a lot of windows. So even in the hot season, we can still sit in there. But during the rainy season, we don't normally have a place because the rain comes into the other hall. So this is the perfect place for us. And even the children, when they come, the survivors, this is where we sit with them.
You mentioned the survivors. It's called the Home of Mercy for a reason.
Yeah.
We can maybe talk more about that in another segment, but you do have a number of little girls and young women who've been rescued from sexual abuse.
Yeah, about 66 right now.
So they're right adjacent to this building.
Yeah.
And they have access for feeding and all the other things you're talking about.
And we meet every Friday with them in the afternoons. Since they've started school, now we're going to be meeting on Saturday.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks, Teresa.
You're welcome.
So, we're in chapter 7 of Matthew. I hope you're enjoying this Sermon on the Mount that Jesus gave. I can never get enough of it. I mentioned in one of my books, Cantelon's Casual Commentary, which you can get, by the way. Cantelon's Casual Commentary. You can just type that in, and the search engines will take you to all kinds of places that sell it. 21st Century Guide to the Life of Jesus for the Internet Generation. Anyway, I make the point, in that book that I have a homing instinct for the Sermon on the Mount, and I really mean that. All the years that I lived in Israel, all the years I traveled up to the Upper Galilee and down to the Lower Galilee from Jerusalem to southern Lebanon, going up the Mount of Beatitudes, down the Mount of Beatitudes. Every time on the way back, I would turn in to the place where Jesus preached his sermon. I just can't resist it. Pull out my little Bible from my back pocket and read the sermon again. I can never get enough of it. It's just genius, this sermon. Anyway, we're in chapter 7, and we'll take our time with this. Verse 1, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you'll be judged. And with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own, you hypocrite? First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Whoa. You know, Jesus really, really strikes a chord here. Because all of us judge. It's like an automatic reflex. We see someone else's behavior, we disapprove, we pass judgment. You know, if I can use the metaphor, our court is always in session. You know, we're always looking with a critical eye at others. And in many cases, in making those judgments, we act impulsively. We have no regard for due process, no defense attorney. We prosecute and we judge. It's a kangaroo court, and the sentence is always punitive. So the winner in these court cases is always us. And by disparaging others, we exalt ourselves. I was nearly run over on my way to the studio today. I was in a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, 80 kilometers an hour for those of you in kilometers per hour. And fortunately, I saw him in my rearview mirror. But this guy came, I'm sure, 100 miles an hour, just weaving through people, going out into the wrong lane. And of course, I immediately judged him as a totally irresponsible, careless idiot. You know, it's amazing how in traffic we very quickly make judgments. And then he was gone. But then it occurred to me, maybe he just received news that his wife is dying in the hospital. Maybe his child is about to be born and there are complications. He's got to get there, and he's got to get there as fast as he can. And if a policeman pulls him over, the policeman, when hearing his story, will put his light on and lead him to that hospital at the same speed. You know, probably that wasn't the case. But the point is, that could have been the case. I was so quick to judge. Are you the same? So, the thing is, in disparaging others, we exalt ourselves. And that's the issue. Exalting ourselves at the expense of others is a function of pride. We compare, we compete, we win. No one is as righteous as we are. Never mind that the scales of justice are weighted in our favor. Okay. The Jewish Mishnah says, quote, when you judge any man, weight the scales in his favor. When you judge any man, weight the scales in his favor. And then it goes on to say, quote, do not judge your fellow until you are in his position. Do not judge your fellow until you are in his position. This guy who was just blasting us all off the road a few hours ago may have been in the position of desperation, trying to get to the hospital before his wife died. I don't know. But when I put myself in that position, then I'm less a judge and more of a compassionate, concerned fellow citizen. Dear God, help him to get there before his wife dies. See, the thing is, ignorance of a situation can blind our judgment of a situation. In Jesus' words, you know, there's a huge timber in our own eye as we try to extricate a little bit of sawdust from our neighbor's eye. And what's more, when we judge others, we're judging ourselves. We're often seeing our own faults in others and judging them vicariously. How do you know that that was his motivation? Well, if you were honest, because you've done the same thing with that motivation. So you just impute to him your own frailties. I mean, We do that. How come we're so smart? Oh, he's just, she's, how come we know these things? We don't know these things, except we do know these things about ourselves. And so we project that bad behavior onto others. And it's sort of, a salutary exercise. We kind of feel lightened a bit. We've transferred our guilt to the other person. Again, I'm not a psychologist, but I know enough from the scripture to know that in many cases, is exactly what's going on. For wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself, King James English. For thou that judgest doest the same things. The lazy person is very quick to judge others as lazy. The liar is always afraid someone else will lie to them. There you go. So, this should also be said. To censor someone is not necessarily the same as assessing the ethical values of their choices. Judgment is one thing, discernment is another. Jesus is warning against harsh, destructive judgment, not against objective appraisal. Sometimes in a very loving and concerned way, we might make an objective appraisal of a situation. And maybe 8 times out of 10 we're right, but at least in the adjudication of that process and the communication of that process to the offending person, we come across as compassionate and understanding rather than as judgmental. So, even Jesus is a model of this. John, the apostle, tells us he came into the world not to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So, condemning people, Jesus is saying, is basically a non-starter. It's a slippery slope. Ethical discernment, on the other hand, can be seen as redemptively motivated, but our instinct should err on the side of grace. Be generous. Boy, many times I've been guilty of judging. And I have tried in my older years to step back a bit. And as I was just saying a moment ago, put myself in that person's shoes. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know what abuse they suffered as a child. I don't know what their learning disabilities may be. I don't know what their education is. I don't know what the pressures are that they're facing at home. I don't know about the sorrow that they've just suffered through the loss of a dearly loved one. I don't know the pressure and the stresses of finances in that home. I don't know about the rebelliousness of their teenager who's driving them to distraction. I don't know these things. And so I see some kind of behavior that is in perhaps reaction to all of those stresses. I make a judgment. I'm dead wrong. I should be kind. Hi friends, Jim Cantelon here. I'm in Malawi in a very, very interesting setting where I am with a number of leaders who oversee various aspects of our partner ministry here called Somebody Cares. And I just might read some of what they represent. We have leaders here who are involved with youth, some with safe motherhood, others with granny's care, some in the health sector, some in the education sector, some in the legal sector, believe it or not, almost acting as paralegals, some as administrators, village pastors, and chiefs. And I have the great privilege of spending 2 or 3 hours with them, just taking them through some of the strong biblical principles that are, if you will, the infrastructure of the ministry of Somebody Cares. And so here they are. These are key leaders, chosen leaders, and they're all here to praise the Lord. Now we come to a very interesting comment from Jesus, which is often referred to, and I think sometimes we don't fully appreciate what he's trying to say. Verse 6 of Matthew 7. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Pretty nasty pigs. Some people find this pearls before swine comment confusing, if not offensive. I mean, how can we call anyone a pig? That's too, cruel. Well, a little cultural background might help here. In Jesus' day, Gentiles were referred to by the Jews as dogs or pigs. Even today in modern Israel, I as a Gentile was often referred to as a goy. And a goy basically means a Gentile. It can also mean an outsider, the unwashed. It's a kind of a derogatory term, really. But in Jesus' day, it was much more blunt than that. But, the Gentile was seen as the great unwashed, a disbeliever, a heathen, scum. Well, a devout son of Abraham saw himself as separated from the Gentiles by a great gulf. The Jew was a citizen of heaven, the Gentile of hell. Even when, we lived in Jerusalem, the first place we lived in for the first few years, we didn't know it when we rented the flat, but right next door behind us was an ultra-Orthodox community. Very fine people as I got to know them, but, some very strong cultural/religious values, especially as related to women. And Kathy, my wife, is a beautiful, blonde, fair-haired, fair-skinned woman who looks young enough to be my oldest daughter, which causes me no end of challenge. But she just has that eternally youthful look. But back then, she was in the prime of her youthfulness. And we'd be walking down the street with our 3 little blonde kids, and some of our neighbors, men, who were walking towards us in their Orthodox clothing, long black coats and hats and peyot and tzitzit. They would wait till they were about 10 steps away from us as they're coming towards us, and then they would do this, shielding their eyes from my worldly wife, who had the temerity to be wearing a sundress and have her hair uncovered. I'm not doing anything but trying to express that this is the culture, and I understand that. But we were seen as the unbelievers. Interesting little anecdote. It took us just a few weeks before this began to happen. Once they knew we were there, I would say 3 out of 4 Friday afternoons, just before Shabbat began, and I've mentioned to you many times before, a day begins in Israel at sundown to sundown. And Shabbat, Sabbath, begins Friday night when the sun goes down. There's actually a big siren that wails over Jerusalem. You hear it everywhere, which means the sun has gone down and the Sabbath has begun. Maybe 20 minutes, half an hour or so before Shabbat began, we'd hear this kind of furtive knocking at our door. And I'd go to the door, and there would be one of our Orthodox neighbors, not looking me in the eye, looking down, looking embarrassed, and asking me in broken English if one of our boys could come over and turn on their electrical lights, because their electrical lighting system, which was automatic, had failed. And you're not allowed to turn on a light at Sabbath because it's like lighting a fire, you see. And so, we're Gentiles. We're the lost anyway, So what's it hurt, for a sinner to commit another sin? So usually our oldest son, who was 7 at the time, would go over dutifully and turn on their electrical systems and whatever else they needed turned on, their oven sometimes, and then come back. I understand what this means. So, when in Jesus' time, a Gentile was a dog. A Gentile was a pig or a swine. So, in the cultural context, as Jesus is warning against judging others, he's acknowledging that there will be those whose worldview will blind them to lasting values. They'll be unreachable by the law of Moses. They will trample on Jewish values, savage the believer in the process. So he's saying, be discerning. Don't waste your time on someone whose ignorance of the language of heaven renders them deaf to spiritual values. Now, Jesus was Jewish. All the disciples were Jewish. He's speaking to Jews. But he's making a point here. Becoming a citizen of the kingdom of heaven is citizenship on another level. It's, if you will, identity on another level. You're neither Jewish nor Gentile in the kingdom of heaven. There's no marrying, no giving in marriage, no ethnicities. You are children of the Lord. But there will be many who, because of cultural values, will not hear your message, will not respond positively, and will trample you because of your faith. It's going to happen. And let's remember, we can understand only what we can understand. So, don't bare your faith soul to everyone indiscriminately. Why would you do that other than to kind of spiritually show off? One has to have real spiritual sensitivity before one begins to bare one's soul in terms of one's personal faith. One has to be truly led by the Spirit before one does that. So use wisdom in relationships. Reject those who reject the holy. Move on. Don't get stuck. Did you hear what I just said? Reject those who reject the holy. I mean, some people just beat their heads against a wall their whole lives, trying to convince someone to come to Christ. There are those who will not come to Christ. They just won't. And so you have to just accept that and trust that somehow the grace and mercy of God will reach them before it's too late. And keep in mind this, too. It's not our responsibility to save anybody. Jesus said, nobody comes except the Father draws him. The fact that you're a believer, if you are, regardless of how strong you think you are, or how weak you think you are, or how old you think you are, how young you think you are in the faith, the point is this. You are a believer because God has drawn you to himself. There has been a supernatural work in your life. And even though you may be a new believer and just kind of in the entry-level, early childhood, state of faith, the point is this. That new life in you has been generated by the Most High. This should be an encouragement to you. The Lord knows your name. He knows your history. He knows where you come from. He knows who your parents are. He knows what you have suffered in early development. He knows what you have done wrong. He knows your strengths, your weaknesses. He knows your giftings. He knows your sin. He also knows your heart. He's been working on you a long time. And slowly, incrementally, kindly and gently, not in a hard-headed, in-your-face kind of way, but in a simple drawing incrementally, he has brought you to himself. And now you are a man, a woman of faith. Praise God for that. It's evidence that God still works in our world. And even in the chaos, the dysfunctions, and the sorrows of our lives, he is still drawing people to himself. Don't take it lightly. I'll be back right after this. Often friends like you are curious about what WOW does with your donations. And as I've often said on the television program, we are concerned about home-based care, especially for those who are dying, orphans and widows, of which there are tens of thousands over the past 23 years. But one of our responsibilities with home-based care is making sure that there's some nourishment available in these homes where care is being provided. And as some of you may recall, in March of this year, or 2023, there was a major cyclone called Freddy that struck Mozambique and Malawi. And Malawi was badly hit. Infrastructure was wiped out, roads, culverts, outside latrines. But the maize crop was severely damaged to the point where the cost of maize, which is a basic food component for Malawian everyday people, has more than doubled. And so our partner on the ground, Somebody Cares, contacted me about an urgent need for maize to help our orphans and widows through this difficult time. And so with your help, we managed to raise enough for a huge amount of maize here. I think this is about $15,000 worth. We need to double this, at least. And as the Lord speaks to your heart, if you can help us with this, wow, what a difference it will make in, as Jesus called them, the lives of the least of these. So thanks for your consideration. You know, friends, I've written a book. I'm not going to show it to you here, but you can Google it or just type it into your search engine. Cantelon's Casual Commentary. It's a book I've written on Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John, and it's lengthy. It's about 520 pages, but it can really help you, you know, in terms of following along as I take you through the Gospels here on JCT. It's a great devotional tool, and it's designed for, you know, the entry-level reader. I haven't written it as an academic. I've written it as just, you know, as one evangelist used to put it, one beggar telling another beggar where to find some bread. In other words, just person to person to help you in your walk of faith. Cantelon's Casual Commentary, the 21st Century Guide to the Life of Jesus for the Internet Generation. Worth checking it out, and you might want to purchase one for yourself. Thanks for watching. See you again next time.